Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for waiting. I just wanted to give a couple of people more chance to get in here and figure out a couple of other things, but we're so happy that you can join us. I'm used to being able to see all your wonderful faces and interacting with you, but I'm just gonna guess. Just to start off, my name is Candace Daiwan. I am the VP of Creative at 50+1 Strategies, an advocacy and organizing political firm. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris McNeil, and I'm a senior designer at Resonance Campaigns.
And those are our Twitter accounts. My DMs are, I believe, open right now if you have any questions about this later. So just a little bit about me. Born and raised in Hawaii, proud Filipina. This is literally the biggest thing that I've ever designed, which is the Gavin Newsom bus. I love to have fun with designs, but I also really love the idea of accessibility to design. So that's one of the things that we're going to be going over today. Chris?
Yeah, I'm Chris McNeil. I'm from San Luis Obispo, California, and I'm here in San Diego. I'm a primarily digital creative, but you know, left and right. I do print as well, and I'm doing print this cycle. Yeah, and me and Candace met in the hurly-burly of the San Francisco political design world. Sometimes on the same side, sometimes on opposite sides, but always working for progressives.
Oh, and when he says opposite sides, remember that we're in the Bay Area, so opposite sides means the same sides for the rest of the country.
Right.
Just so, before anybody gets any ideas. So here's graphic design one-on-one, and this is something we're both super passionate about. We totally believe that you don't have to have fancy programs in order to be a good designer. In fact, that doesn't guarantee it. So some of the concepts that we're going to be showing you, you don't have to have Adobe, you don't have to have a lot of stuff, but this is something that if you, as a person, have Word or Google Docs, or how can you make even the more basic programs look pretty? Here are some basic samples. And obviously, everything that we're going to go over today, you can teach a whole course on. You can major in a lot of the things that we're going to talk about. So they are going to be very truncated, but we encourage you to use this as a jumping off point to go out and learn more about any of the topics that pique your interest. Pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think, you know, people wrongly think that graphic design is really about like creativity, and you know, designers like to perpetuate that idea because we want to seem, you know, like magical unicorn artists, and non-designers, you know, kind of want to perpetuate that too because they want to value their own opinion as opposed to, you know, like an empirical proven truth about how human beings you know, perceive visual information. Unlike, say, something like engineering, for example, to use something on the other end of the spectrum. Engineering isn't really about creativity per se. It's about, like, you know, training and specialized knowledge. So if we had to teach you the principles of engineering in like 60 minutes, we would go in a certain order. You know, we would first we'd do like arithmetic and then algebra. I'd make sure you had like a basic grasp of geometry, and then we'd like wrap it up with some applied physics or something to you know, get you to, like, you know, use a pulley or a lever or something. And it's very much the same with graphic design. There are really only 3 categories to that make up graphic design. That's typography, layout, and color theory. Typography is a lot like algebra. There's these, you know, basic categories, and then there's a lot of if this then that sort of substitutions. It's very formulaic, actually. Layout is a lot like geometry. There's, you know, equations of shape and size and relative position. And color theory isn't a lot like physics. Color theory literally is physics, and you'll notice both of those icons on the right side of your screen both sort of evoke Isaac Newton. So typography, you know, choosing type, setting type, it's pretty simple. There are 8 kinds of type. Next slide here. You want to get to know them. You want to spend some time with them. Take them out to dinner. Don't just use them for their body. We'll come back to this slide. It's a really involved slide that will explain a lot. So the main distinction on the next slide here is between serif and sans serif fonts. And you already know that on this next slide. Even if you don't know that sans is a French word that means without, and even if you don't know on the next slide here that the serifs are those little red highlighted portion of the letter forms, you know that there's a class of typeface that looks like Baskerville on one hand, and a group that looks like Helvetica on the other. What you're probably not familiar with is why we have that sort of unconscious association and distinction with these. On the next slide, serifs serve the needs of book text. Sans serif serve the needs of advertising, and most of what you're going to be doing is advertising. Books will always be set in serif, and things like fine print will always be set in sans, and there's a structural reason for that. Newspapers have done this for centuries. To get you to buy the newspaper, they set the headline in sans. You think of like the newsie waving it across the street, or if it's in a newspaper stand, that headline will always be set in sans. But 9 times out of 10, once you're reading the actual column inches on the newspaper, it's almost always set in serif. Every full-length book you ever read will be set in serif. So we've got some, you know, sort of designer lingo here. There's display copy, body copy, and small print. Display copy is always going to be 14 points or greater. Some fonts in Typekit are actually calling themselves like display copy. You can actually see that as a delineator. Body copy is always 12 to 9 points. That's always going to be the range for body copy, and small print is anything by definition 8 points or fewer. You don't want to go any lower than 12 points for print, and you don't want to go any lower than 14 points for digital, and there's a really good biological reason for that. So young human retinas, you know, people who are, you know, 18 years old, they capture 100% of the light that is in their environment. I am 44 years old. I'm an old man. My retinas capture half of that light. Baby boomers right now, they have about 20 to 30% of that light. They're literally in like dim rooms. Their retinas have clouded over. So that's why you've got to, unless you're absolutely sure that your target universe, whether for, you know, paid or organic or whatever, is going to one age group or another, you got your bases if you're doing political work. So that means obviously 12 point for print and 14 point for digital. Yeah, and there's a Bob Ross slide that kind of hammers it home. I would screenshot this and put it above your desk. It's an easy rule to follow, but it's hard to, it's a good thing to know, but it's a hard thing to sort of keep faith with. So this next slide is a monster. These categories are important because they follow the trajectory of human history. That black letter that you see, that fracture, that's the, you know, the monks, you know, drawing those like 12th century Bibles. The point is that it mimics the movement of the human hand. All those thick and thin strokes are meant to look like handwriting. Script is just another version of that. It's just more legible. The nib of the quill pen is smaller. It's still type, but it's imitating human handwriting because the printing press is this like newfangled technology, and you don't want to scare people off. By about like the 16th century with Old Style and Garamond, you know, the printing press has kind of triggered the Renaissance, and literacy has become a thing the way coding is like a thing now. So legibility becomes a really important point. And this is what I'm getting to. Right here at the modern one, right here after the American Revolution, you get these really thin hairline serifs. They're super thin because they feel kind of fancy because they're showing off this new technology, saying, look how thin we can get this metal to be. And when you see it printed on the page in like 1784, it's it's like a special effect. But that effect, and this is a really important point to make, is only legible from like several feet away. Once you get further, it becomes a problem. So then, you know, we have the Industrial Revolution with like slab serif. We've got, you know, advertising, branding. We need posters. We need things to be like distance legible from far across the street. The thing about these super thin hairline things is that they disappear at a distance. And that's a thing called typographic convergence. If you think of, it's why you will never ever see this kind of typeface on a freeway sign, because it's really, really important that you be able to grasp and read that information really, really quickly. On the next slide here, Vogue uses it exactly for that reason. they're trying to tell you that our brand isn't you know, our logo. Our brand is the most famous people and beautiful people in the world. We don't really care if you see our logo type. You know, obviously on the other right side, you know, the Us magazine, the supermarket tabloids, that's the category that most political advertising falls into, is the opposite. Picture superiority is something we're going to get to in a little bit. The next slide here is where we talk about Comic Sans. Comic Sans is in fact good. It's just that your mom's has been using it since, you know, Windows 98. It doesn't look special. It looks amateurish because it's common, and that's bad, because if you're an amateur, you want it to look professional. But what if you want your political communication to look amateurish? Comic Sans is just the ticket. It's perfect for that. This next slide here, it doesn't look like anybody paid for it, and that's the key. If it's pre-installed, it looks common. If it's not, it won't. So buy a font if you want it to look professional, and a subscription to Adobe now gives you Typekit. So, you know, just understand that those pre-installed drop downs are always going to make your advertising or your political communication, you know, look common if you use the commonly accessible fonts. So here's another Bob Ross pro tip. Beginners should choose one serif and one sans serif for their project. There's an entire subculture of type hipsters who are more than happy to recommend tasteful combinations. Let them do the work for you. Nobody will know. I do this every single day. It's just an easy hack. And once you sort of do this over and over again, you'll sort of decode the whole type thing here. Candace?
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. And yeah, a couple of people in the chat said, you know, Comic Sans, it's not bad in general. There's a lot of really great things about it. It's just the commonality of it, and it is accessible. It's more accessible for people. It's accessible in the way of like the mom and pop cafe down the street. If they print out their menus in Comic Sans, I don't have a problem with it. It's when entire like multi-billion-dollar businesses use it is an issue, right? Or if you want to look professional. So I love that point, Chris. So first off, let's start out with a little bit of a question and answer. I'm going to show you guys 3 different recipes. I'm going to call them A, B, and C. And for these recipes, I would love in the chat, just tell me which one you think is the easiest one to do. So this is the answer to the question, how do you boil eggs? So A, B, or C. So these are your 3 choices. I'm going to show them to you again, A, B, or C. And any guesses in the chat as to why I'm doing this, or what point I'm trying to get across? I might have actually said it just. Oh, great. So a lot of people are guessing C. I would be surprised, you know, if you, great, readability and accessibility. Scannability is one, clarity, readability and understanding info. So what's really cool is that, you know, we know that this is easier to read. These are all the exact same recipes, but they did a study where they tested people on how to use a website. And a lot of our current websites have come from this study. And a lot of people actually think that if it's easier to read, it is easier to do. How can this affect us in the voting world? Well, simple. If you think that it's really easy to vote, then it'll be a lot easier for you to begin voting. If we make it harder for people to even read the instructions about how to vote, they might think that the entire process itself is hard. And this is not taking into account, obviously, any voter issues or anything like that. But if you present the exact same recipe or the exact same steps or the exact same instructions in a hard to read font or a hard to read, like hard for people to see, and we'll explain it a little bit about how you can make sure that it's easier for people to see, they will come into the process already thinking that it's hard because their brain has had to work a little bit harder to even start this process. So for example, sometimes it will be worth it for you to struggle. Like if this was a handwritten recipe that you found from your great grandmother, you're going to struggle and it's going to be worth it. But if you're just trying to figure out a quick way to use your Instant Pot, if I have to read through too much, I might think that it's just difficult. And I might think it's 20 steps. Why would I do something like that? So let's go to some of the things that you can do. We'll go over some of the ways that you can make it a little easier for people to read and understand. Pass it back to Chris.
Can everybody hear me? I'm just going to wait for a second because there was some audio problems before. Yes, yes, I can. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. One little typographic problem that you see over and over again is widows. Eliminate all widows. Those widows are the lonely abandoned fragments that are hang at the top of columns and pages. They never look good. Another thing that's really common, this happens a lot in print, eliminate all orphans. Orphans are those lonely abandoned fragments that hang at the bottom of columns and pages. They never look good unless you're trying to call attention to that fragment. Some designers kind of use this every now and then. This is the Meryl Streep cerulean sweater speech from Devil Wears Prada, which is just fantastic, where she really spikes that last word, stuff. But by and large, you want to eliminate them. Tracking is the phrase that we use to describe the space that happens between letters. A really easy graphic design trip, if you want your message to look super fancy and you only have a couple words, track it really large. You'll see a lot of federal buildings do that with, like, Futura or whatever. Kerning alters the space between letters. This is really important for signage, and the larger your words are, the more important it is to kern. Designers have to manually kern all display copy, everything, tag heads above 14-point type. For example, the word vote set at 12-point is not a problem. The word vote set at 64 points is a problem. You got to tuck that V up under that O. Certain letter pairs they take up too much space, and what you're looking for is what's optically correct, not what's mathematically correct. You gotta really trust your eyes. It's the first sign that what I'm looking at has any quality at all, because it's evidence that the human hand has gone in there, because it's not something that happens automatically. If this basic step is not taken in large-scale political communications, I know I don't have to give it any more consideration, because it's like getting a resume that has a misspelled word. I don't need to go any further on it. I don't know why we don't have the technology that can do this. We can put a man on the moon, but we can't create software that accurately spaces letter forms. I don't know why, but it's just a fact of life. A good analogy is that kerning is like pouring water.
One day.
Yeah, right. I mean, you keep hoping for the Adobe update to fix this, but it never does. The analogy is that you just want to keep the same amount of volume between each of the letter forms. This next slide, doesn't this look elegant? It actually sucks, because you want to avoid long stretches of text. After about the third or fourth line, the eye loses its place trying to get to the right edge, back and forth again. So this is a pro tip. This is something that print designers do every single day. You don't exceed 80 characters per line. It's a very simple rule. Stay between 45 to 75 characters per line. Some people say 40 to 60, but in general, it's like 9 to 12 words is the rule, or the alphabet 3 times. We actually have science on this. We know people prefer reading in columns for short copy. Setting all copy in uppercase to provide greater emphasis is a common error. It has the unintended effect of rendering a message less readable. When design emphasizes everything, it emphasizes nothing. When I'm working as a creative director, this is the #1 thing I say every single day to every single designer or every single creative. It's just a thing that people want to do because they don't want their message to get lost, so they want to use scale, but it inhibits readability, I think. That's why we invented lowercase letters.
Also, one thing that I found out very recently is that all caps, if you're blind and you can't see, if you can't see and you use an auto reader, it'll read out. A lot of auto readers will audibly read out every single letter of this. So if they come across a sentence and it's all caps like this, it'll read out every single thing. So that's something to think about if you're putting this on like a website. On Twitter, like a lot of people have started not doing as many full cap stuff because it assumes that it'll say like TYPESET, and it's unreadable for people that aren't, like, for accessibility reasons too. But I just found that out.
So here's another
Sorry,
really
back to you,
simple
Chris.
rule. Yeah, avoid underlines. You know, it compromises legibility. It confuses M's with N's, and generally just sort of wrecks the readability and comprehension. For emphasis, use this formula in order: italics, bold, small caps, and color. And you had a point about this, Candace? I
Yeah,
forgot.
and again with the accessibility, but also just technologically wise, like cultural wise, ever since the mid 90s, a lot of us have thought about underlines as being a link. And so if you have underlined words on a PDF, a digital PDF, or underlined words on a website and it doesn't link to someplace, it confuses people and they actually might think it's broken. So I totally agree with this. I would avoid any underlines just for emphasis. And there's a lot of other really cool things that you can do in order to emphasize something. So back to that original slide that Chris was talking about, where, you know, typography was the first thing. The second thing is layout. And actually a lot of people, when they first think about graphic design, they're actually talking about the concept of layout. The great thing is, again, you don't need a fancy program to do layout. Fancy programs do make it easier, and they are industry standards. But let me teach you some concepts that you can use in everyday programs like PowerPoint, Google Slides, Word, Paint, MS Paint. Some of the best designs I've seen have come from MS Paint. So one of the first concepts that you really want to achieve with layout is balance. And so what does that mean? So let me show you a couple of slides. First, this is very, very loud. It's very crowded. In your brain, you're reading this as a lot of information at the same time, and you don't really know where to look, versus quiet. You know exactly what word that I want you to read here. And so this is a concept of haravakui versus minimalism. And in the art world, there is a time and place for both of these things. Haravakui is where you fill up a space with all this information, and there's different reasons for that. But minimalism also has different reasons where you focus people's eyes and you have them focus on just one thing. And how does this work in design or in stores? The way that I like to think about it is that, like, think about a thrift store versus a high-end store at a mall, like a high-end fashion store. So on the left there, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there, but this is exactly what I want from a thrift store. On the right side, if the thrift store looked like the right side, I'd be really confused about what this thrift store was doing or selling. I'd be wondering what they had in the back room. But on the right side, this is where they're really focusing more on how important each piece of clothing is, how important your experience is. On the left side, it's more all about like the fun experience of trying to find something. How does this relate to design? So think about that balance slide that I had shown earlier. Think about this balance slide and how you can bring these concepts into just even text in 2D. So what's really cool is we have evolved as creatures with sight to view this as heavy versus light. So any guesses in the chat, and I'll keep talking, but if you guys have any guesses in the chat as to why that black square on the bottom feels the closest and heaviest? Maybe I should prepare you guys to get ready with your keyboards. Position and color, very good. It's the darkest. Density. You know what's great about your question mark that you put there? Why do you think that that's dense? It's a black square. It's just 2D. It's just pixels. And you're not wrong. It actually does feel very dense. And so what's really neat is imagine yourself that you're standing on a flat plain, like in Oklahoma, where the land just goes for miles and miles and miles. And there's this big, dark rock in front of you, and it's the closest thing to you. Your brain we have adapted to think of the darkest, biggest, most solid thing to be closer to you. So it feels like it's denser, it feels like it's closer. And what's really fascinating about that to me is that these are all just pixels on a screen, and I'm showing you on your screen at home. These are all concepts that you've brought to a 2D plane. And if you take a look at that top square, some of you who have low contrast vision might not be able to see it, but it is a light square on gray. And that actually emulates the idea of a cloud. Now, technically, a cloud is actually heavier than that rock. But because it's far away and it's floating, we envision it as being super light and away. And if you take a look at these two slides that I had earlier, you can kind of see this emulated where like I'm just using the word loud over and over again, so you're reading it, right? But it's also cramped together, and they're closer and they're denser because of that concept of the rock versus the cloud. So the big thing that we want to do in layout is to balance this static versus dynamic. So yep, opaque and shading and stuff. Yeah, exactly. Static and dynamic. So first of all, static is solid, it's traditional, it's here to stay, it's something that I can pile a bunch of things on and I know it won't move, but at the same time, it's also known as boring, it's centered, it's like, we've seen it over and over again, it's not gonna move, it's immovable. Like those are both, like this is a concept that's both negative and positive to people depending on what they bring to it. Versus it's a counterpoint dynamic, which is super exciting and it's moving because it emulates a bird taking off, it emulates a plane taking off, it think of fireworks shooting diagonally, think of things being off center. And the great thing about this is it's super exciting and it's new and it's fresh and it feels young, but at the same time it's new, it's young, which can be, both positive and negative, where it's brand new. Is this something that I can rely on? Is this something that I can trust? Versus the static. So you can see here why I'm encouraging everyone to try and find a balance between static and dynamic, because our eyes really want to focus on both of those things. And so newspapers, like Chris pointed out, have figured this out. If you see here, this is like a really typical newspaper layout. They've figured out a really good way to have balanced and dynamic. And you might look at this and say, well, that looks pretty static to me. It's actually not. If you think about how 2/3 of the screen is one type of typeface here on the left here, and if you think about how on the right side here, it's a different kind of typeface, it's thicker, this black box here, there's that space in between everything that's kind of bringing the balance to it. So that's the concept of, and it's hard to explain really quickly, but that's the concept to me of dynamic versus static, and that's your main goal, especially when you're just starting off in design, to try and figure that out. So another fun thing that Chris will bring up is color theory.
Color theory, just double checking. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so color theory is fun, right? You've probably seen this color wheel before. In school, you probably, learned about primaries from this outdated RYB color model. And then you learned about the secondary colors, made from mixing primaries. And that's pretty much as far as, your average person gets: red, yellow, blue, orange, green, purple. And then, if you take an art class or whatever, you learn about tertiaries where you mix a primary and a secondary, like lime, amber, teal, chartreuse, whatever. But that's the color wheel, and it's a wheel. And the reason why we use this diagram is because the colors have a directional relationship with each other. One side is warm, obviously, and the other side is cool. Why is that important? It's important because of the way our brains perceive color temperature. A cool hue in front of a warm hue gives like a flat 2D appearance, and a warm hue in front of a cool hue gives a 3D-like appearance. Isn't 3D always better? No, 3D is not always better. People prefer 2D objects to 3D objects. We have science on this. It's kind of counterintuitive because we live in a 3D world, right? Sort of. The 3D has a lot of detail. It's got a lot of drop shadow. Everything is competing with itself. But the one on the left is fast and easy. And in general, human brains want fast and easy. We just want what's important. If you think of like a stop sign, a stop sign only has what's important. It's got hue, some type, and some composition and a shape. Yeah, back to the color wheel. Complementary colors sit opposite each other on the color wheel, and I'll just cycle through these here. Complementary colors, they complement each other in the same way that like friends are frenemies. You know what I mean? When they're next to each other, they can sort of bring out the best and the worst and contrast really strongly. If you can harness this effect, all of a sudden your design starts popping. Anytime a client says, make it pop, I just plug in these hues and values and just jack up the saturation. It's not creativity, it's just math. The Golden Gate Bridge is the most photographed landmark on planet Earth because, not because the bridge is painted, it's because we painted it the complement of blue. The odds are that the sky and the ocean is blue on a given day. So when the stakes are really high and you really need to see something at a great distance against blue, we're going to paint that life jacket or that helicopter orange. If you've ever seen, you know, quote, redhead, you know, with actual orange hair, wearing a blue shirt from across the room, you know that effect. Animators know this trick in their bones. Disney and Pixar, they pull the same tricks year after year after year, decade after decade. If you have a protagonist whose environment is blue, you can bet Disney is going to make the same decisions. Again, it's not a new trick. This is a Vermeer. It's hundreds of years old. Nature does it. You know, the savvy designer does it. It's literally the oldest trick in the book. Here is the book. It's from like 1604, I think. Analogous colors are next to each other on the color wheel. You know, it's a favorite of like interior design and like environmental campaigns, because if you get outside the city or a manufactured artificial human environment, that's the way our natural environment looks. There's not a whole lot of like color variation on a hillside. There's a serenity and a maturity to analogous color palettes that you can harness. The opposite trick is to emphasize saturation. How much pure color something contains, the distance from gray. We're genetically programmed to notice high saturation. It's something, saturation fades with distance, so it tells your brain something's right in front of you. There's a list of things, of visual things that humans are hardwired to pay attention to, and Candace is going to cover some of those later, but saturation is on that list of like non-ignorable things. So high saturation food, for example, is a double whammy. It's a signal that means food or fruit, or it can mean poison, it can mean danger. It's generally, you know, nature's way of saying, you know, ignore all of the irrelevant stuff, and look right here. You can go to the next slides here. Actually, why don't we go right to the gentleman. So I love this slide because food porn is, I think, it's a clever phrase, because both food and porn are on that list of non-ignorable things. And this is like a triple whammy, right? You've got food, you've got saturation, you've got sex, and you've got some other things. In 2018, I was the DCCIE Digital Creative Director, and we did a large-scale test in the Maine 2nd Congressional District, and you can actually see these ads in the Google and Facebook archives. And we ran saturated tests, saturated ads against less saturated ads, and we saw differences on how those perform on various platforms. Yeah, it's something that you can always test. And then an achromatic color scheme. Let's see here. Why would you design without color? The answer is accessibility. It's the colorblind. The colorblind span all ages, all genders, all sexual orientations, but they are disproportionately Caucasian men. What percentage of men are colorblind? Does anybody have a guess? Anyone want to guess how many men are colorblind? 1 in 10. Yeah, it's about 8%. That's a lot. And of course, it depends on your target universe, but you know, that's well within the margin of victory. So not designing for the colorblind when you're doing political communications is like, to my mind, campaigning in a battleground state like Colorado or Nevada or Florida and saying, you know, I can't do Spanish ads because it's just too hard to produce materials in those languages. It's kind of a disqualifying thing in my view. Major companies, Fortune 500 companies, do not rely on Hue to transmit their message. That's one of the reasons that they're major companies. They, you know, pour literally billions of dollars into their brand equity, and they want a return on that investment. They don't leave any money on the table. So there are a bunch of colorblind apps for mobile and desktop. Choose one that works for you. Wave it over every piece of propaganda or political messaging you ever make. Do it for the rest of your political lives. You know, Candace, why don't you talk about the cool list?
Yeah, and actually, before I go to that, to answer the question earlier, yes, layering different saturations over each other is harder to read for those who are visually impaired. So it's very correct. So the other benefit of designing for colorblind and high contrast is that also captures a lot of different groups that normally couldn't see something unless it was high contrast. So this includes, earlier, remember we were talking about the older people or people with low vision. If you design for colorblind, it also designs for them too. So it's a really cool thing that there are, even before, when we first started giving this presentation a couple of years ago, a lot of these apps didn't exist, and now they do, and a lot of them are free because of the accessibility part. So please take advantage of it. Like if you just try to think of, like, especially if you're just starting out, like doing higher contrast stuff is always going to be better. One, it's a lot easier to see, and I'll talk about that in a second. And two, it's just a lot more people can see it. So just like if you build a ramp, everybody can use it. Think of it that way. If you can design in black and white, and you don't have to rely on color, then that's even better to start off. Thanks, Chris. So here's that list that we kept talking about. So this is a whole thing that you can do a whole talk on, and I love discussing this, but this is a list of what grabs attention for most people. Obviously, a lot of this stuff is based on neurotypical. So please bear with me that we don't have a separate list if you have other ways of interacting with the world. But as far as neurotypical, regular vision, but like neurotypical based people, so movement is the number one thing. So that's why GIFs in your timeline make you stop. Videos make you stop. It doesn't even need to have sound. Pictures of human faces. So I'll go into that in a second. Pictures of food, sex, and danger, which if you think about that slide of the gentleman with the food, had it all. Stories. So you guys are probably going to go to other trainings about this, but people telling their stories. We even started off this session on graphic design talking a little bit about our stories ourselves. And loud noises. A few years ago when I was giving this presentation, there was a really loud noise that happened to happen in the room at the exact same time of this that I didn't plan, but everybody stopped and looked. And so that's one thing. But obviously, please don't abuse any of these things. Don't abuse like the loud noises, I think, in your designs. That will probably get annoying very quickly. So Chris, if you want to talk about the picture superiority effect.
Yeah, look, the picture superiority effect is like one of those bleedingly obvious things that it's easy to understand and remember, but it's hard to always do. It's basically this: humans remember visual things, and that pictures and text are more likely to be remembered than text alone. On this next slide, the left is a good design and the right is a bad design. This seems like an obvious thing if you've ever encountered Facebook's 20% rule. You'll see this pop up over and over again. On the next slide, most PowerPoints are bad because we just suck at quickly processing information this way. On the next slide, imagine it's GeoTV weekend. Imagine that you're A/B testing, 2 walk pieces or something, and one has a dominant image and the other one doesn't. On the next slide, the voter who gets the image piece will recall 65% of it, and the voter who gets the text piece will recall 10% of it, and you'll remember what I just said because I put graphics next to those numbers, right? The graphic is the most important structural element in any advertising. Reading is it's really inefficient for us. And also to make the rehash the point about accessibility, not everybody's reading comprehension levels are the same. English is not the first language for everybody. When we read, we see lots of little tiny pictures, and our brain has to identify certain features in the letters to be able to read them, and that takes time. This next slide, that takes no time. That's immediate. And visual ads they need less exposure than verbal ads. And you've only got, milliseconds in political communication. And also, On the next slide, size matters. You know, jacking up the size jacks up the attention to the entire ad. So, you know, bigger is always better. That's why, you know, making sure that you have really high res images for print is really crucial. And the next slide here, eye tracking software tells us that images are viewed before the text. And the reason for that is because of how our brains evolved. You know, really smart apes could process images and remember them. The ones that did that better had an evolutionary advantage, and their genes made it to the next gene pool. You know, 2 million years ago, reading Pride and Prejudice wasn't like a big advantage on the African savannah. And so you really just always got to work to keep that graphic as the biggest, most important punchy thing in your advertisement. Back to you, Candace.
And get ready to type. Yeah, get ready to type, guys. So this is one of my favorite slides that I show. What do you guys see? If anybody wants to type. Ah. Yep. Yeah, crazy fish. For those of you that might not see it, this right here, what's great about this is I've shown this picture to so many different crowds and everybody has the same reaction. I could probably actually hear you. A lot of people are like, whoa, I personally, I've shown this enough that I've already given him like a whole name and a background, and he has a voice in my head and he sounds like, hey, this is actually just a shell. And it has 2 circles and a bigger circle. And so people just think it's, people think it's actually a face. And this is fascinating to me because one of my art teachers way back in my freshman year just casually told me, hey, Candace, faces get seen faster than text, and just never went on with that anymore. And that kind of stuck with me. And so I decided to do a lot of different research. And so humans are wired to find faces. Like, this is shells. These are all just cells. There's no living things shown in this image. And what's the reason for that? There's 2 things at play. Apophenia, which is seeing patterns or connections in random meaningless data. Las Vegas runs on this. Las Vegas wouldn't exist without this. And pareidolia, which is seeing vague and random stimulus as being significant. So every year that I show this, less and less people know what this face is. But if you know what it is, go ahead and put it in the chat. In the 1970s or in the 1960s or 70s, we took pictures of Mars, and everybody was so excited, and we thought we were going to get pyramids, we thought we were going to see water, we thought we were going to see life forms, and this picture came back, super low res, and people really wanted to see this face, and people could not see this face. As our technology got better, surprise, it's just a mountain. We've sent rovers up there. It's gone around it. I can't remember the exact name of this particular mountain, but it's just a mountain, guys. There's no face that's in there. Much more interesting stuff has been discovered, like actual proof of life having existed there, but it's not, there are no carved faces as of yet. We'll probably find that one day. And so why is this important? And it's important because we as graphic designers have to compete with so many other stimulus in the world, that one of the ways that you can kind of essentially hack that is using pictures and using faces to make your point across and stand out from the crowd. So Chris, bounce back to you.
Yeah, look, this is
oh, actually, sorry.
Yeah.
So sorry, this was mine.
I can talk about it, but this is you.
No, I got it. So with that direct gaze, which is when people are looking either at the camera like I am right now, or not at the camera like I am right now, or like in this picture, direct gaze, you should use it and you should know when to use it in order to make your message come across. So we'll have a little slide about the ways to figure this out. But if somebody is looking directly at the camera, then if I agree with this sentiment, or if I agree with the message, I am more likely to have a more deeper connection to this person. Also in this slide too, like we have a stronger connection when you make direct eye contact. However, if this message was something that I didn't agree with, I would look at this as more of a threat, and this direct eye contact would suddenly make this message a little bit more threatening to me, and I would question it more. which is why in this first picture, where if you have something that's a little bit more, that's more controversial, not to me, but that's controversial maybe to your audience, then you shouldn't use somebody that's looking directly at the camera. So how do you remember that? Check this out. If it's controversial, no, use direct gaze. If it's controversial, yes, but do the people that you are sending this to agree with you? Go ahead and use direct gaze. If they don't agree with you, don't use direct gaze.
I would add
and this last point.
Sorry, I would add that this effect is pronounced on video. This is the science behind this is video dominant, but there's no reason why this wouldn't work for print as well.
Also, you know, nowadays, Chris and I just had this realization the other day. We have now, in the last few months, seen each other doing direct gaze just like this more than I think in my entire life. Like most times in the meeting, you don't necessarily have to keep eye contact this way, but this actually might culturally change. Like who knows, in a few months, this might become less of a relevant thing just because we're also used to doing Zooms and direct to cameras. And it's no longer, direct to cameras are no longer something that only professionals can do. We're all doing it. So with that, if you want to close us out, and then we'll open it up to some questions.
Yeah, you know, just want to make a pitch here to, if it's important, hire a designer. It's a whole discipline that takes, you know, years of study and practice. And it's one of those things that because the tools have been democratized, the ability of how to use them really hasn't. You know, if you're running a restaurant, it's fine, but you know, in politics, your political communications have concentric effects. So if you have any doubt, farm it out.
And there's a lot of really great, talented people out there. We're not trying to advertise ourselves. We're actually too busy this year, I think. But, you know, find the talent in your local area, harness the talent. And if you're interested in that too, I love speaking to people who are just starting out and giving you some advice too. But yeah, so that's actually it. So I forgot to put a thank you slide. So I will leave it. Let's put it on the Mars slide as a thank you slide. I forgot to do the thank you slide. So any questions that we have from the audience?
We have, will the slides be available later? Yes, they will. How much should we expect to pay a designer? That is highly contingent on the medium that they're designing in and
their experience. Also, like a lot of designers that I know that are really good, when they were just starting out, they're cheaper. Obviously, when they're more experienced, they're more expensive. I love paying artists in general, but you know, there's a lot of, especially if you work for like a nonprofit or a really good cause, there are a lot of groups that will do it at a, you know, a cheaper rate because they believe in your cause. So there's a couple of like design co-ops out there that are really great. I'm actually on a panel with a couple of these people on Saturday. That's a little bit of a plug. So there's no hard and fast rule, but I think that, you know, it's like asking like, how much should you pay a campaign manager or how much should you pay an organizer? It depends, right? The memes I've been doing have been using all caps for the quotes. I think memes are okay because it's, you know, like that's kind of the point of the meme. And again, this is like a lot of these rules, by the way, it's, the whole point of art is, you know, you've heard people like say, well, I want to break the rules. So the whole point of art breaking the rules is you got to learn how to do the basics before you break them. Think of Picasso, like he's famous for art that broke the rules, but he was a very talented classical artist. He did a lot of anatomy. So if memes, for example, like designing with memes, actually on this screen right here, designing in memes, that's a very specific language and pattern that people are used to, is that it's impact font, I think, and it's all white and it's against, you know, like a picture background. So you are designing within that world.
I would also add that
what do you
memes,
do? Oh, yeah.
Memes usually follow that rule. Memes usually stick to like, you know, one sentence in all caps, you know, not more than like, you know, 4 or 5 words. And once you start seeing those reaction memes that are really long, that have a whole lot, the readability really goes to shit. So most of the like meme world actually follows this rule very well, I think.
Jeremy, to answer your question, I actually think a slate card, I've always thought this to myself, if I ever if I ever taught like an actual like course in graphic design, a slate card would be the final because that is legitimately one of the hardest things to design because there's just so much information and there's so much other stuff that you have to worry about too, right? Like this candidate paid more to be on the card than this one, so they have to be bigger, but they're running for something that's smaller than the mayor. So there's like a lot of different things that go into it. So the number one thing to ask if you have a lot of information and you're trying to fit it in a small space is that Haravakui thing, right? Like, is the point of it to overwhelm? Like, if you're trying to show a ton of names because you want to show like everybody votes for yes on A, and the whole point is to just show the breadth, then show all the names equally. If the point is to highlight a couple of people, like you got Dolores Huerta, you got Jill Biden on it, like maybe they have to be focused. So I think before you think about like, how do I fit this all on here? The number one thing that you should ask is what's more important. And actually what I found to be really easy, or not easy, but what I found to help out a lot is to ask the person that's asking you to put all this information on there to rank the information like 1 through 5. Like, this is the most important thing. This is the second most important thing. The point of all the names to be on there is not to be readable. It's just so they see everything. I hope that makes sense.
Are there any accounts or sources of good political design we should follow to get more example of what's good? Yeah, totally. Hunter Schwartz, the publisher of Yellow Zine, is really doing this the best of anybody I have ever seen. It's just state of the art. What is good political graphic design? And his Twitter's great. And I think it's a Substack. I think you got to pay for it. But it doesn't matter. You can get on his email list and still get a lot of really great content.
From anonymous attendee, what is the first question you ask yourself when you're starting to design? I always like to ask myself, why? Like, what is the purpose of this? Constantly I ask this too, like, if you tell me to design a graphic for Facebook, I need to know, is this an ad? Because there's like certain rules there. Are we trying to convince somebody to sign a petition? Because then that will depend on the pictures. So it's a lot of times it's why. Like, why do you need this? Any suggestions for teaching yourself more about doing graphic yourself?
The books, Candace.
Yes.
Our favorites. Yes. We always have an answer to this.
So many books. I feel bad because I think I should have a slide on all of this stuff. I'll see if I have one, but we don't have very much time. But let me see.
I'll tell you right now, it's The Universal Principles of Graphic Design by William Lidwell is the best book ever written on, it just sort of hacks all the things that we're talking about. And there's another book called 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know about people. And that will up your game incredibly far beyond any software techniques.
Oh yeah, that 100 thing, I don't know why I didn't think of that, because that's a lot of where I learned a lot of this stuff. And what's great about that is it doesn't make assumptions. It actually links to actual psychology tests that were done, so that you can even, like, if you're like me, you can go and read a few of those psychology tests so you can figure out what it actually meant for yourself too. There are pages like Instagram. Should one try to keep the colors or font similar throughout the various posts to keep it looking professional? That is more of a branding conversation that you should have with your org. So for example, if you're doing like a yes on A campaign, then yes, I think everything should be, it depends if you want it to look like again, this is the why. So do you want it to look like it's coming from the official campaign, or do you want it to look grassroots? Because if I show up in the before time and hopefully in the after time, but if we showed up to a rally, right, and every single sign that everybody was holding was all printed by a union and looked all the same, that is totally valid, but that is one version, versus if everybody was holding up signs that were all hand painted in different colors, different handwriting, that's a different style. That's a different message that it's sending. So think of it that way when you're designing for like an online presence. Like, are you going for, is this something that you want it to look more like grassroots? Or is it something that you want to do more like, these are all the official things from the campaign? And it depends on your campaign. Like if your campaign or org want to put out a united front and it needs to be official, then you should adhere to that. And you can also do kind of a half-half thing where you tell everybody these are the colors you should stick to, but go ham. We're doing that with a couple of our clients where we're like working with artists and, giving them the basic branding, but they are free to do whatever they want. I know that we only have like 1 minute left, so I think raise your fellow designers to check out to keep this conversation going. Yes, there are there's so many really great designs. I really encourage you to not just follow designers, but follow artists on Twitter. I love comic books, so I love following Jen Bartel. She is an artist she's done a bunch of stuff like Captain Marvel, and she's a woman of color, and she's really cool. She works with a lot of really neat colors. So I would try and absorb as much art as you can out there, and then have it be reflected in your work. Sorry, we only had like 10 minutes for all the questions. Oh, thank you, Sean. Sorry that we only had like 10 minutes for all of the questions, but like I said, my DMs will be open, or if you want to tweet at us like Irvi just did, more than happy to answer any other questions online too. And I will be around for the rest of Netroots. And again, I will be on a panel on Saturday. Just look up all the design panels, and it's the one with 4 other really cool people. I probably should have had the time. Oh, it's Designs on Democracy. Sorry. Oh yeah, great. We can go to the virtual hallway. So I will do that. And I think there is a really important thing for everybody to head to now. So I really appreciate you. Chris, anything else you want to say?
Absolutely not. You said it perfectly.
Great. Thank you guys so much, and good luck.
All right. Bye-bye.